chapter 5, section 3. In this section, we start really moving away from just protesting, and the break from Britain is kind of done here. This is where we're not quite so longer trying to keep our mother country part of us. We're definitely moving farther towards we are, going to take up our guns and we are going to resist. So, during the early 1770s, this is when our protests kind of pull back from the way they were in the late 1760s. That's not necessarily to say that the colonists were like, oh, great, we're happy again. It's more that they kind of had been doing it for a while, and they were tired. But these Townshend duties that had been passed, they end up getting, like we said before, the Boston Massacre, they are repealed. So repealing those Townshend Acts kind of made everything okay again. But, like we said before, there's still the one on tea. Colonists still drink tea. Everybody's been asking me this year why the British drink all this tea. It's strange. No one's ever asked that before. But it's because Charles II married a Portuguese princess, Catherine of Braganza. And as her dowry, she brought one of the islands in, I think it's an island off of the Indian subcontinent. And they grow tea there. So it was like, hey, tea. It became fashionable because the Queen drank it. And that's what happened. So the book takes the time to point out that with every cup of tea our colonists are drinking, they're paying a tax that Parliament has placed upon them without their consent. So it goes, okay, so trying to figure out why each side was so angry and so unwilling to give is something that you need to be able to do when you're looking at history. So the reason why the British put such a heavy tax on them is because they felt that these colonists were receiving benefit of something that they didn't really put too much work into. So they're the ones that started the French and Indian War because they wanted to expand. Then Britain had to come in and bail them out. Then they're also the ones who started these conflicts with the Native Americans across the Proclamation line because they wanted to spread out and they couldn't be satisfied with what they had. So the British then had to send more troops to keep the peace in that area. So it's like, the British that are living in England are saying, look, we are having to buy in a lot. We're having to use our tax money to support the soldiers, to support these different military maneuvers, and we have no benefit from them. I mean, we see nothing that comes from that. They are doing this to protect people who don't pay a tax. So shouldn't they pay for it? But then on the colonist side, they're saying, if you want to tax us like citizens, if you are saying that we should pay taxes because we have to support this military presence, number one, we need to be able to vote on those taxes. We need to have representation in Parliament so that we can decide whether or not these are justifiable. And also, why do you really need troops stationed in the colonies? I mean, the 7 Years' War is over. We have, crushed the insurrection from the natives. So why do you still have troops here? If we're really English citizens, you should not have to have troops here because it seems like you're thinking you're going to have to make a war on your own people. So this is kind of what both sides are thinking about at this time. And when you look at it that way, you can kind of understand where each side is coming from. But of course, when you're mad, you don't really care. You're like, I don't care. I'm right. You're wrong. Done. All right, in 1773, Parliament passes what's called the Tea Act. This was supposed to help the British East India Company. This was their big product was tea. They make money growing tea in India, selling it to Britain, and then selling it to the colonies. But when the colonies boycott tea because of the unjust tax, this hurts the income for the British East India Company. Technically, this Tea Act that gets everybody all angry in the colonies, it actually lowered the overall price of tea for the colonists. So, yes, they get mad because the price is lower. Um, the Tea Act actually made it so that the East India Company no longer had to send their tea through England. They could just send it straight to the colonies. And they're like, look, it's cheaper. Who cares if you're paying a tax on it? You're overall paying less money. So it doesn't really matter. The prime minister is thinking, look, your price is lower. Who cares? Who cares if you have to pay a tax? But the colonists, it's kind of like the principle of the matter. They're like, look, we still didn't consent to this. And also, they feel like the British East India Company has a monopoly on tea. They were really the only British company that was allowed to sell in the colonies. And, when you have laws keeping certain companies from like selling product somewhere, it's called a monopoly when one company has all of the market share. So if I sell, what's something weird that I can sell? I sell fly swatters. And mine are the only fly swatters that the state of Mississippi has decided should be sold in the state. I would have a monopoly. That means that other people who make fly swatters can't come in and undercut my prices to give the consumer the ability to choose either a cheaper option or even just a different one. I can charge whatever I want for my fly swatters because there's no one to compete with me. And this is something that the colonial merchants don't like. A lot of them are selling tea that is Dutch. And I mean, yeah, it's smuggled in, but they're going to pretend that doesn't matter. But now that the British tea that's coming in legally is much, 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 much cheaper, they're really not going to be able to compete with that British tea because, they're having to pay the markup for the fact that it's Dutch and then also the fact that it was smuggled. So, it costs more money to do that. Many of the colonial leaders actually said that, it doesn't matter that the overall price is lower. We are still having to pay a tax that we did not have anyone to give our side of the story to. So we don't like it at all. I don't remember what this video is, but I'll figure it out and then I will link it for you on LMS. I'm sure it had to do with the Boston Tea Party. Okay, so a group of colonists were called the Sons of Liberty, and they organized this movement in port cities, so any city that has like shipments coming in and out of it. They're stopping the East India Company tea from being unloaded off of the boat. They tell the ship captains who are bringing in the tea, basically that, we're going to beat you up if you unload tea. They also are threatening the colonial merchants who say that they're going to buy this cheap tea to then turn around and sell. Basically, it's boats coming into these harbors and a bunch of, like colonist men are standing there and glaring at all of the sailors. saying you cannot unload your tea. And then all the sailors on the ship are like, we really would like to. And they're saying, no, you cannot unload your tea. No tea is unloaded in New York, none in Philadelphia. No other port cities actually unload this tea. But in Boston, their governor, whose name was Thomas Hutchison, he says, I don't care. We are unloading this tea because I said so. He really wanted to kind of prove to these people, no, you have to listen to me. I am the governor, and kind of put these colonists back in line. The problem is that the people on the like the ship's captain. There we are. The ship's captain has to have a specific, like almost like a license to be able to leave the harbor. But if they're not allowed to unload their tea, they can't get the license. But they really need to leave so that they can possibly take the tea somewhere else. It's a big domino effect. If they cannot unload their tea in these harbors that they're supposed to unload them in, they can't do their jobs. And like most of these sailors, they're like, look, I don't care what your problem is. My problem right now is that I cannot do my job and you're delaying me. So everybody was angry pretty much across the board. They will not allow this tea to be taken off the boat. It's like 2 weeks that these boats are sitting in the harbor. Finally, on December 16th, 1773, a big group of people are gathering in, like not in the harbor because that means like in the water, but I mean like in the land part of the harbor, whatever. A lot of this big group of men who are disguised, quote unquote, as Native Americans, get on the ship. They were very poorly disguised, and everyone knew who it was, but everybody was like, oh no, I don't know who that was. That was such a native person, and those savages and whatnot. I mean, like, everybody knew, but this gave them enough plausible deniability. It took 3 hours, but in that 3 hours, these people threw 342 cases of tea into the harbor. They were very specific to make sure that the only thing that was damaged was the tea. They did not want to, mess up the boats. They didn't, and they also made sure that people didn't steal the tea and then, go to sell it later. It's that whole, like we're making a statement. We don't want to destroy things. We want to destroy the thing that we have a problem with, not other innocent people. They destroy 90,000 pounds of tea. That is a lot of tea. George III, when he finds out, he is not pleased, to say the least. He kind of says, he flips out and he's like, look, we have to punish these people who are pretending like they don't have to listen to me. I am the king. Parliament makes laws. We have to do something. So Parliament ends up passing 4 laws. They're called the Intolerable Acts. So the first Intolerable Act closes the port of Boston. This is more important than it seems on the surface. Boston has been a port city for a very long time at this point. It makes a lot of money through that port. So people, you get supplies through there, merchants get things that they're going to sell. There's a lot of business transactions that happen in that port. And if the port is closed for business, no one is making any money. 2 other of the Intolerable Acts increase the powers of the royal governor, the same dude who was like, you have to unload the tea. It also is abolishing the upper house of the Massachusetts legislature, and it cuts the powers of these town meetings. This also is really offensive to our colonists because they have been living independently in the colonies, making their own laws since the early 1600s. Like we saw in the last chapter, our House of Burgesses, the assemblies, all of these things have been operating with no help from England, and they've been doing it well. And suddenly, England wants to come in and say, you no longer have the right to do that. And this makes all of these people who originally left England because they weren't able to do as they pleased, makes them even angrier. Another big problem is that anyone accused of murdering a British colonial official has to be tried in Britain rather than the colonies. This is very offensive because if you murder a British official, or if you don't, if you're just accused, you have to go to Britain to be tried. You may have never set foot in this place before. It's there's all kinds of things wrapped up in that. It takes longer to have your trial. You may not be able to afford an attorney. I mean, all these different things that go into justice that is now prohibited because this law is put into place saying that you have to be you have to be shipped back to England. Finally, the last law. These middle ones are all kind of smushed together. I don't want to really get into the specifics because it's more than you need to know. But the last law is the Quartering Act from 1765. It gets strengthened. Now, this act it basically says, hey, look, we have to put these troops here to protect you. We don't have anywhere for them to live. So colonists, you have to open your homes and put these people up. We aren't paying for it. You are reaping the benefits of the soldiers being there, so you need to take care of them. They also passed something called the Quebec Act. This sets up a government for the territory that England gets after the French and Indian War, the part of Canada that they get from France. It claims the land from the Ohio and Missouri rivers and says, hey, you know what? North of that, it's all Canada. This takes Western lands that some of the original colonies had claimed as their own. It takes it away and says, no, this is Canada. And these colonies did not like that at all. They were like, this is our land. This also prohibited these colonies from, or these colonists, I should say, from moving west. This is what we were having the problem with in the first place. This is why things were going wrong and what led to the French and Indian War. Settlers wanted to move west, and they were prohibited from doing that. By saying that these colonies, or this area that these colonies had claimed as their own, is no longer that, it's something else. And by the way, anyone who's already there, you can't move that way. They don't like that. They're like, look, what are you doing? You can't do this. The colonists, before this point, the colonies were pretty separate, and they didn't really have this identity as Americans. It was very much like, okay, I am from Massachusetts, I am from Virginia, but when this port is closed, all of the colonies step up and they start helping the people who live in Boston. Food and supplies move into Boston from the rest of the colonies. And we have these committees of correspondence that are, kind of working behind the scenes and organizing meetings to say, okay, look, what do we need to do next? We know we don't like what's happening here. We need to move forward. That meeting is called the First Continental Congress. It took place in Philadelphia in the fall of 1774. 12 of 13 colonies sent delegates. Georgia did not. And among our delegates, we have our famous Adams, John Adams, Samuel Adams from Massachusetts. We have John Jay from New York. He becomes an important person in the Revolution as well. And George Washington and Patrick Henry from Virginia. Both of these people also very important. Congress, this Continental Congress says, look, Britain, you need to repeal those intolerable acts. Colonies have the right to tax and govern ourselves. We always have. We came here and we started that. You can't control us on those situations. Um, we're also going to start training our militias because if you're going to have soldiers stationed here, we want to be able to protect ourselves. The government is not supposed to have a standing army. If you're going to have one, we're going to make it so that we can fight back. The Continental Congress also calls for a new boycott of British goods. And it kind of says, all right, we have our list of demands. We are going to adjourn until May of 1775 because, we got to get the demands to England. They got to talk about it. And let's see what happens. The British government kind of just laughs at the First Continental Congress. There is no way they're going to agree to these demands. And it decides that it's going to use force instead of, being polite to show the colonists that, hey, you are still part of England and you have to do what we tell you because this is England. The colonists, in keeping with this plan that they came up with at the First Continental Congress, they start organizing even more so militias. And it gets to where you have Minutemen. So literally, you need to be ready any minute in case you have to fight. But these are not professional soldiers. These are citizens who are willing to protect their home, their friends, their neighbors from what they see as governmental tyranny. So in April of 1775, General Thomas Gage is the new governor of Massachusetts, and he has his troops stationed in Boston. They are helping to control the city and to close the harbor. He learns from some informants that Minutemen are storing guns and armaments in Concord. This is a city that's about 20 miles from Boston. So he says, okay, let's go take those guns. They're not supposed to be stockpiling them. We're going to take them. On April 18th, he sends 700 troops marching out, and they are supposed to get these guns, and they're also supposed to capture some of these colonial leaders. The troops set out, and this is when Paul Revere and his midnight ride, one if by land, two if by sea, come into the picture. The Patriots put a signal in the steeple of Boston's Old North Church to say they're coming, like the British are coming, whatever. And Paul Revere and William Dawes rode into the night to warn these cities along the way that the British they're marching, they're coming, get ready. About 5 miles away from Concord, there's a town called Lexington. And here on Lexington Green, 77 Minutemen were waiting when the British get there. The British commander says, look, go home. We aren't here to fight you. We're following our orders. The Minutemen say, no, we're not leaving. It's very tense, and someone shot. No one knows who it was that shot, but we know that the shot happened, and then chaos ensues. Everybody starts firing. The British open fire. They kill 8 Americans. This first shot is called the shot heard round the world. Let me see. I think this is my last one. Oh, here we go. A larger battle takes place a little bit farther down the road in Concord. This time, we have 400 Minutemen gathered to fight the British, and they kill 3 British soldiers. The British then retreat toward Boston. They have not gotten the weapons that they were supposed to have gotten. They were not able to capture important colonial rebels because they had already heard about this plan, and so they were going into hiding. As the British retreat, you have Americans kind of hiding along the road in like the underbrush and the forest and stuff, and they're firing their weapons at the British as they're trying to march into retreat. So it's, they're just shooting them as they come, and the British can't really do anything because their method of fighting is not suited to fight a guerrilla warfare campaign. By the time the British actually make it back to Boston, about 300 of them had been killed or wounded. So this is our beginning of our revolution. This is where we start, and it's all because the British are trying to take away something that we felt we had always had. If you look at this map right here, I really like maps, by the way. This map shows the way the march went. So we start here in Boston, and they actually went across right here because this area of Boston is, okay, at the time, it's no longer like this, like they've reclaimed all this land back from the sea, but this was the only way you could get out of Boston. And so, or the only way by land, you could, get on a boat and sail across. So that's the whole, like, the message in the Old North Church was, how are they marching? Because we need to be prepared. They ended up going across this water, and they end up marching. Oh no, Lexington Green. Let's shoot some people. And they shoot some people, and then they march. Oh no, shooting more people. Uh-oh, this isn't good. Let's turn around. And they're getting picked off as they make their way back to this little peninsula. I am almost sure that this is where, like, the British already had forces set up here, and so that's why they retreated there. The Third Amendment to our Constitution is our right to keep and bear arms. That is one of the first things that the British tried to take away from us, was our ability to defend ourselves and our homes from a perceived threat. If you trust your government, the thought is you don't need a weapon. And for a while, they did trust their government. But here we have army forces setting up in not only our colonies, but they're living in our houses. Okay, now I'm thinking, did I say that was the third? Because it's the second. I hope I said second. Anyway, the third actually is that we don't have to quarter troops in our home. And I always make a joke that that's my favorite amendment because it seems so just ridiculous to us. Like, why would you have to put, military people, why would you have to open up a room in your house? That sounds stupid. But that's exactly what the British were forcing upon our colonists. They were like, look, you need to give them somewhere to live. If you don't, we're going to, keep going down. They had like a whole list of, first the army is going to use all of these particular rooms. Then after that, we're going to go to this other tier all the way down until all of the space has been used up. They really wanted the colonial assemblies to set aside money to, like, make a barracks. And the colonial assemblies were like, we're not doing that. We don't want them here in the first place. So, whole bunch of trouble. Is this the last one? Yeah. Okay, so that would be the end of section 3. I hope I made sense. I have had a very bad migraine all day, and so I'm feeling like words are hard and I'm not making any sense. But please let me know if you're like, Ms. Murphy, what? I have no idea what you were talking about. If I did good, great. So happy about that. And I guess section 4 coming up. Woohoo.